So today we're going to start talking about the Indus River Valley. The Indus River Valley extended from modern-day Afghanistan to Pakistan and northwest India. So the modern-day India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh is where the Indus Valley is made up. It's on the Indian subcontinent, which is a landmass that is part of a continent but distinct from it. It's actually shaped like a triangle hanging from south ridge of Asia. So the area is separated from the west of Asia by mountain ranges, the Himalayas and the Hindu Kush Mountains. The area is made up of these mountain ranges, river valleys, a dry desert-like interior plateau, and of course, because of the river, very fertile coastal plains. So we have the monsoons that cause environmental conditions in the area. Monsoons are seasonal winds that occur in summer and winter. The summer monsoons are warm and moist, and the winter monsoons are cool and dry. So the problem with monsoons is you get unpredictable flooding, and the rivers sometimes change course because of the amount of rains that came. And the seasons are very unpredictable. So with the monsoons, one of the problems with monsoons is, in addition to these other ones, is that if the rains are early or late, or too much or too little, crops are destroyed and people starve, which is a famine.
So as we look at these different river valleys, you should be seeing some similarities and some differences with how these rivers flood. As with Egypt, the flooding was very calm and peaceful, but the Indus is much like the Tigris and Euphrates in that it can be destructive and it's unpredictable.
So looking at these two slides, on the left we have a depiction of monsoon winds coming out of the mountains, and on the right we have one coming off the water. So in the chat, is the left a winter or summer monsoon? Hopefully in the chat you said the one on the left is a winter monsoon. So on the right side, is that a summer or a winter monsoon? Since you already know that the one on the left was the summer or winter, the other one's obviously the other. So here on this slide, we can see the direction of the winds. The summer monsoon, the winds are running in a clockwise pattern. In the winter monsoon, the winds are running in a counterclockwise manner. And one of the other things about the monsoons and the rains is that the wettest place on Earth is in the mountains of northwest India.
We're going to watch a quick video showing the floods that occurred due to a monsoon in Pakistan in 2010. So even in our modern world, people are still dealing with the same problems that they dealt with some 3,000 years ago.
So we're not really sure how the first civilizations began. There's many theories about this. There's theories that they could have come by sea from Africa, maybe through the Hindu Kush Mountains, but we do find farming villages along the Indus River. So just like in Mesopotamia, in Egypt, early civilizations in India emerged in the river valleys. Civilizations extended hundreds of miles from the Himalayas to the Arabian Sea, and more than 1,000 settlements have been found, and two of them are Harappa and Mohenjo-daro. So the Harappa civilization contained cities that began around 2500 BCE, and the large two cities were Mohenjo-daro and Harappa.
For us, when we say Harappan civilization, it means the same thing as Indus River Valley civilization. We can use those two terms interchangeably.
So the Indus Valley was pretty advanced for its time in their city design. They had city walls or platforms that prevented flooding. They built levees in man-made islands.
So a levee is kind of like a dam, only the levee goes on the sides of the river to make sure it doesn't overflow, whereas the dam will stop the flow of water.
So urban planning in the cities were based on the grid system. So planned placement of structures and roads. So unlike some of the cities we saw in Mesopotamia, or early cities where just like they built wherever they felt like building, these cities were actually planned, which is a big change from what we've seen in other places. Believe it or not, even in all this time ago BC, these people were so advanced that they actually had plumbing and sewage systems. They had bathrooms with drainage systems in their homes. The wastewater flowed out underneath the streets into sewage containment tanks outside of the city walls. The homes were built using oven-baked clay bricks, which are sun-baked bricks, but unfortunately they would deteriorate over time. Some of their homes were actually 3 stories high. And in the center of the city was the citadel. And the citadel served many purposes, and one was for protection, one was for meetings, and one was for government center.
So the 3 big takeaways that the Indus civilization gives us is that urban planning based on the grid system, the plumbing system, and the use of oven-baked clay bricks, which were stronger than the old sun-baked bricks we saw before. So we can actually see these 3 elements in this picture of Mohenjo-Daro. We can see that they did plan their cities as all the houses are facing the same direction and they're built on right angles. We can see their sewer system. This is one of the ways they would create a sewer system. They would have some sort of trench going in the middle of the city, and that would help their waste flow out of the city, and they would cover it with boards and sometimes put earth on top of the board so that you wouldn't see what was flowing by, because that would just be kind of gross. And their bricks were oven-baked bricks, and it helped them to build bigger, stronger structures than before.
So one of the things that we noticed in the buildings in the previous slide was that they actually had doors and windows in them, which were allowed to be done because of the oven-baked bricks that they were using, a much stronger material. Here's a picture of what the city might have looked like. And the key thing here to remember is that the main streets of the city were running north and south, which you see outlined here. And the smaller cities were running east and west. Very similar to the way our cities today are developed, how we have main streets, like for here, we have Main Street in Fairfax, where we have everything, and then we have Pickett Road coming off of it.
And here in the background, we have the Citadel complex, which was the government religious center, as well as a fortress for defense. Here we can see a bird's eye view depiction of Harappa. And again, we can see that everything was built on a right angle. Everything is a square or a rectangle. We can see where our streets would have been straight going all the way through the city. So it was very easy to navigate, unlike our cities in Sumer or Egypt. Now, Washington, D.C. is a planned city, but it's not based on a grid. Instead, we have lots of circles like DuPont Circle and these crisscrossing streets, and that makes it very difficult for us to get around D.C. That's one of the reasons I never go to D.C., because I always end up getting lost. If I go to D.C., I'm taking the metro. And this is what the sewer system would have looked like leading out of the house. These different pipes would let the waste flow out into a ditch, what would then be carried out of the city. Okay, of course, I wouldn't want to get that close to these trenches. They probably wouldn't smell that fresh.
So with this slide, we'll look at a couple things here. Language. So the written language, it's kind of impossible to decipher because it has over 400 symbols, and it's difficult to figure out what actually is being said or tried to be said. The society was relatively equal, which means that men and women were pretty equal in standing. It was very prosperous, and it continued to grow over the years. And we think that animals were probably important, maybe most important for farming. And they also had copper and bronze tools, but surprisingly enough, they may have been a very peaceful people because we found very few weapons.
Here we have trading seals, which contain the pictograms from the Indus River Valley. These were used when people in the Indus Valley traded both with each other and outside their civilization. We found these as far away as Sumer and Egypt. We know that they used to mark their packages with these trading seals, and they would also be used to close documents and seal them. We can see some of the pictograms on these seals, which we have not been able to decipher. We don't know the meaning of their language, and they include animals, different types of animals. I think my favorite is the one in the lower left-hand corner where it looks like we've got a man trying to separate two tigers or lions from fighting each other. We don't know what it's all about, but it's pretty interesting to look at.
So what we do know is that the area was most likely a theocracy. Remember what theocracy means. There were no temples that we have found, but we did know that they used the citadel for religious events if they needed to. The power was based on divine assistance, and religion and political powers are closely linked, as evidenced by the citadels. And the religion is linked to modern-day Hinduism.
And Hinduism is a religion we'll get into a little bit later as we go deeper into India.
So with trade, they traded gold and silver from Afghanistan, semi-precious stones from Persia and the Deccan Peninsula. And the Deccan Peninsula is actually the area on the southern peninsula of India, of the area of India, south of the Narmada River, also known as the Deccan Plateau. Cotton was their main export, and they were the very first civilization to grow and spin cotton in the area now known as Pakistan. The Indus River made trade extremely easy because we didn't have the cataracts that we saw in the Nile River, which made trade a little bit more difficult, and no portaging or having land caravans. Most of it could be done along the river. And we found trading seals as far west as Mesopotamia, so we know that they actually did trading with a lot of different people in a lot of different areas. So we have evidence that the civilization began to decline around 1750 BCE. The decline was caused by a number of things, and some of those are earthquakes and floods, probably shifted the course of the river, which made it maybe a little bit harder to get around. Some cities were completely destroyed by earthquakes and floods. It made life much more difficult because of the different events that were happening naturally. And then we have the Aryans who came in from the north and invaded.
So we're looking at a map of the seismic activity that we would find in India. And of course, right here on the borders where we would have the Indus River, and we can see that that's a darker color of red, maroon. So that's where we have more activity. Also here, as the Himalayan mountains start, we see seismic activity on that side of India as well. So the Aryans are going to come from the Hindu Kush mountains. They had actually lived in Eurasia, an area called the steppe that we'll talk about quite a bit this year. And they're going to move through the Khyber Pass, K-H-Y-B-E-R, the Khyber Pass, and make their way into the Indus River Valley. So looking at this picture, showing us the Aryans, what type of society do you think they had? What was life like for the Aryans before they moved into the Indus River Valley? Go ahead and take 20 seconds or so and let us know what you think based on this picture. What were the Aryans like? So hopefully you said things like they were militaristic. We can see that they had a strong army. They were using war chariots like we talked about with the New Kingdom in Egypt. They had these long spears and they were organized. Okay, so that made them fierce warriors.
So the Aryans are warlike people. They're tall and fair-skinned, likely from the Eurasia or Middle East area of the Caspian and Aral Seas. Migrated through the Khyber Pass, used chariots, axes, spears, bows, and arrows, and they had armor for their warriors. They were pretty well trained and very brutal. Word for war is desire for more cows in the Aryan language.
And if you think about it, that makes sense. Before they had come to the Indus River Valley, these were a nomadic people and they were herders. So for them, their animals, including the cow, that was a way of life and they needed them to survive. And they would go to war in order to gain more animals like the cow from their enemies to help them survive.
So the Aryan timeline looks like this. Around 1500 BCE, they invaded and migrated to India. They take Dravidian culture, descendants of early Harappas. And most of what we know of the Aryans comes from the Vedas, which is their sacred literature.
So there were 4 Vedas in total. You're not going to need to remember them. They are the Rig Veda, the Sama, the Yajur, and the Atharvan Vedas. And these are some of the oldest living scriptures in the world. They were composed around 1500 to 1700 BCE, and then they were written down around 500 BCE. It takes about 1,000 years for them to get these words, these ideas on a written platform. The Rig Veda means fountain of knowledge, and it's regarded by Hindus as the highest and most sacred of scriptures. And here over on the side, we have a picture of a priest from Aryan society. Each Veda is a collection of hymns and prayers. What are hymns? In the chat, what is a hymn? You've probably heard that term before. And a hymn is a song, okay? So why were these composed as songs? Well, remember the Aryans were nomads. Nomads really didn't have a reason to keep writing around. They're moving around from place to place, so you can only carry so much stuff with you. So since they weren't writing, but they needed to memorize these different prayers, they made them as songs. Just like you guys could probably sing an entire song that you've heard on the radio plenty of times, but you're not going to be able to repeat a 2-paragraph essay because it's not a song. It's not as easy to remember. The hymns belong to different ages where they were preserved by holy families through an oral tradition. Generally, these stories and hymns were passed down from father to son, and those families would make up the priest class because they were the ones who controlled the religion. They controlled these stories. And over time, these hymns would be written in Sanskrit, which was the Aryan writing system. And we still use Sanskrit in places in India today. And these were written down during the later period of Aryan existence. So Aryan society was made up of 4 major groups. And it was a highly classified and structured society. We call a type of society like this the caste system. Think about it like this. If you break your arm and you get a cast on your arm to help heal the broken bone, you can't move your arm. Their society was very similar to this. You could not move in society. What your father did, that would be the same job that you would take on, and you would marry someone from that same social class. You could not move up, you could not move down within your lifetime. How they did that, we'll talk about it later. This system was based on what they called Varna, or skin color. The Aryans who had migrated into the Indus River Valley were lighter skinned and taller, and their goal was to keep those who had come from Dravidian society, the descendants of the Harappans, who had darker skin, at the bottom of society. So at the top, we have the Aryan classes of Brahmins, those were your priests, your Kshatriyas, who were your warriors and leaders, and your Vaishyas, which were your herders, farmers, merchants, and craftspeople. And at the bottom of society were your non-Aryans. These were your Shudras, your farm workers, servants, and laborers.
So over time, the Aryans settled into India, adopted some of their customs, while also influencing the natives to embrace their system of social classes. In this picture on the bottom right is depicting tea harvesting. So the Aryan religion was polytheistic, means they worshipped many gods and goddesses. Often these gods were from their natural environment and represented the sun, the moon, storms, fire, wind, things like that. And also some of their gods were animal in nature or a combination of man and animal, also known in circles of social studies at Woodson as manimals.
And we'll go deeper into the Aryan religion, which becomes Hinduism, next unit. And that's it for our notes today.